What are some of the ways to legally pay less tax? That's going to be the topic of today's video. Hi everyone, so if you're an expat or a high net wealth individual in particular, go over to infuriated.com and see how we can help you. Now on today's video, I'm going to talk about how you can legally reduce your taxes. Now, obviously this is a minefield and this is not any kind of formal advice because I'm not a tax advisor, but I do know some perfectly legal ways you can pay less tax or fewer tax, should I say, and it depends on many things. So first of all, one easy way to pay less tax is to move your residency. This doesn't work if you're American or Eritrean or if you're from several other countries that charge by citizenship. So if you're an American, you are charged tax all around the world. But if you're British, if you're Australian, if you're from many countries, you can legally take yourself offshore and pay fewer taxes. However, one thing I would say is get your ducks in a row, because it's not like, a lot of people forget this, it's not like you can live in London and have your money in the Cayman Islands. You can do that, but you can't pay no tax on it, right? You have to have everything in a row. The same thing, you can't have, I don't know, your company in Australia and you're living in Thailand and you hope to pay no corporate tax on the company in Australia. Moving offshore usually works best when everything is moved offshore. Yourself, your company if applicable, and so on and so forth. And also be very careful about the rules, because some countries are making it harder because they need more revenue now because of COVID to actually go down this route. So for example, if you're an Australian, I do know that as one example, you have to show quote unquote intent. In other words, you can't just leave Australia and think, oh, I'm not spending any time in Australia now, so that's it. You basically have to show intent. That could be like cancelling your gym memberships. It could be cancelling different like phone subscriptions. It could be spending hardly any time in Australia. So often people have to get it in writing. They have to actually show, they have to collect information to show they are actually not planning to come back. It's not like you can leave Australia for just 1 year and keep everything open and then come back and hope to pay no taxes. So I would say though, if you're going to move offshore, do your proper research. If needed, I know nobody likes to pay accountants or lawyers, but if needed, pay those bills. For British people and some other people, it's not as strict yet, but it could become like that in the future. Number two though, for Americans, is change your residency and your citizenship. So the interesting thing is, and a lot of people don't know this, like non-Americans, but every single year the number of American expats giving up their citizenship is skyrocketing. So it's only about 5,500 or 6,000 a year now, but bear in mind every single year is typically going up by 10, 20, 25%, because a lot of wealthier Americans who are already offshore know that unlike some Europeans and others, they can't just pay less taxes because they're resident in another country. So obviously that's more severe than just changing your residency, but bear in mind if you're an American and you go to live in the UAE, you can't just pay less taxes to the American government just because you're moving. Now the third thing though, and less severe for most people, is just take advantage of onshore tax avoidance schemes. So for example, in the UK, we have something called an investment ISA. So the government wants to encourage people to save more for their retirement because we're an aging society. So therefore they allow people to invest up to £20,000 per year per person tax-free, and that's quite a big advantage because £20,000 per year every single year over decades is a lot. And remember, even the gains then can kind of accumulate tax-free. That's just one example, but government, if they want to stimulate the economy or help people go towards a certain behavior that they want, they do have certain tax schemes for that. And also another thing I would say is if you're a returning expat, there are often ways you can pay fewer taxes. I'll give you just two examples. Let's say if at the moment you're a British expat, you're living in Qatar or another 0% tax jurisdiction, 0% on capital gains, and you're going to come back to the UK. Often it can make sense to actually sell out of those positions before you come back to the UK, because then if you invest again, then the capital gains tax in the UK will be based on the fresh amount. In other words, let's give a simple example. Let's say you've got £500,000 in your investment account and you put in £250,000. That's 2 times, right? So if you go back to the UK and you keep that money in your brokerage account, and then it grows to, I don't know, 2.25 million, like in decades to come, that's a huge gain, right? Because you bought it at 250,000 and now it's worth like over 2 million. In comparison, if you sell out when it's at 500,000 before you go back to the UK, then it will be kind of formulated, because then the starting point is 500,000. That's one example, but also as a British expat or other expats, it's possible often to actually invest in structures whereby if you go back to the UK, it's quite tax efficient to take out some money every year, typically about 5% per year. But I think the bottom line is these things always change. The biggest mistakes people make are often analysis paralysis. So they worry about things when they can't actually affect what the tax rules are going to be in the future. So usually what makes sense is just focus on what works now. Nobody can predict in 2030 or 2040 what rules are going to change. Just focus on what works now, make sure it's properly legally compliant, and make sure you've done your research and you've actually got an expert to look at this. How can I help you? In two ways. First of all, are you an expat, a high net wealth individual, or just somebody who lives in a part of the world where it's difficult to get access to quality investment solutions? In which case, go onto my website on adamfayed.com and find out more. If you don't fit into any of those categories, then in which case there's a range of free material on my website, on this YouTube channel, and indeed on my Quora, where I get over 200 or have received over 231 million views in the last few years. And finally, if you want to actually read my thoughts in more detail, go onto Amazon and find my book on there.